Okay, so welcome everybody. I can see a few of you are my friends or people from the community, so we already know each other. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jamie Dobson, and I work for a company called Container Solutions. And Container Solutions does cloud native things, distributed systems, public cloud infrastructure, but where we're also very strong in is strategy and strategic execution. And most initiatives in terms of cloud native transformation can get off to a rocky start because people either don't know what they're doing, or they make what you could consider reckless decisions because they don't fully understand the technology or the process they're getting into. So my speciality is strategy. It's something I enjoy teaching. It's something I try to do in my capacity as the CEO of Container Solutions, but it's also very difficult. Now I usually do these talks in physical places. So this is the first time I've ever done this one in a webinar. I'm really, really hoping that it works. So that's me. This is the beginning of a series. So today we will look at the Container Solutions framework for strategy, the 5 or 6 key elements. But actually there's going to be a number of follow-ups, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment. My colleagues here today from Container Solutions are Carla and Teresa. They will copy links into the chat box, answer questions, facilitate. If there's any obnoxious people, they'll chuck them out. This never happens. We have yet to have, we haven't been Zoom bombed, we haven't been hacked or anything like that, but their job is to facilitate while I focus on the content. I'm quite happy for people to ask questions in flight, especially if they're clarification questions. Sometimes people say, can I ask a question? Because my boss at work is doing this. Should he continue doing that? This is the type of question it's best to take at the end. And so if there aren't any more questions, I think I'm going to get started. I hope you've all got coffee. I'll be talking for about half an hour, maybe a bit longer. Okay, so let's get moving. The strategic framework that we're going to cover today is all in the book on the left-hand side. So as far as books around cloud native goes, this is a bit of a bestseller. I think we sold 50 in February, woohoo! But it's often bought by executives and middle managers who have got a specific problem to solve. But this is not a sales pitch for the book, because all of the patterns we use are free to order in the link on the right. There's a huge excerpt from the book that covers the strategic framework, which you can download for free. So everything you need to get started is actually free. And actually, if you're my friend, I'll just send you a copy of the book. I hope nobody from O'Reilly's listening. So it's not about selling the book. It's about just letting you know that it's there should you need it, but there's lots of resources to get you started that won't cost you anything. Now, a follow-up to this webinar will be my colleague Pinny's deep dive into cloud native transformation. A lot of the concepts we touched today, he will retouch again in 2 weeks, but he'll go much deeper, helping middle managers to actually plot a specific transformation out. And he will look at a case study from a company called WealthGrid. That's it for the calls to actions. There'll be a few more reminders at the end, and I will ask Teresa and Carla to drop the links to those webinars in the chat box so you can subscribe whilst we're talking today. All right, so what are we going to be doing? Well, first of all, let's try to answer this question. What is strategy? Nobody actually knows. There's no agreement, and the word itself is so overused, it's become almost meaningless. But we do have a specific meaning at Container Solutions, and in sharing that, I'm hoping it will help you lot to also take that specific meaning with you so that you can use it in your day-to-day work. Many people say that they're strategists. Of course, it sounds good, doesn't it, if you put strategy in your title. And many people have got some very strange ideas. They think a strategist maybe looks like the Duke of Wellington, sitting on a horse and making plans in a tent. Often we think of strategists as being masterminds, a bit like the villain in a James Bond novel. But actually, you'll see that the modern strategy doesn't look anything like this. And I think it's quite an important thing to analyze, because everybody on this call wants to be a strategist. We want to take wherever we are now and close the gap on where we need to be. So there are 5 key characteristics that we're going to look at when we get to that section. And then finally, the most important thing, strategic actions. How do you plan actions? How do you do one thing first, one thing second? How do you know which order to do things in? And how, importantly, do you know when to change direction, right? Well, I used to work at Accenture, and our boss used to say, Plan the work and work the plan. This is not good advice, right? Because sometimes the context changes, so your plan is absolutely meaningless. So how do we deal with context changes whilst also focusing on the long term? That's what that section's about. Okay. A practical definition. By the way, don't worry about screenshotting these slides. We're going to send them to you as a PDF immediately. You can copy and paste and take whatever you need from them. So let's start with IKEA. So at Container Solutions, we don't view strategy as a thing. You don't go to your cabin in the woods, come up with a master strategy and come back and then execute it, right, exactly how you would plan to execute it. We actually see strategy as an emergent process, a process, and it's something that happens and changes shape over time. To give an example of this, we can think about IKEA. Now, most people either love or hate IKEA. I actually quite like it. I go for the meatballs. And most of us know, just instinctively or just from what we've read in the literature, we know that IKEA is hugely innovative in its supply chain, hugely risk-taking and risk-seeking in its product development. And not many people know this, it actually does localization quite well. So Chinese IKEA and US IKEA are very different to what we have here in Europe. And that's because the styles are different, but the raw materials are different. Not many people know this. IKEA are extremely risk averse when it comes to finances. So they like to raise money on their terms. And in fact, they don't use external capital for anything except the purchase of land. So this means they don't have to return dividends to private equity firms, which lets them focus on the long term. This is their strategy. Most of us know about this. But of course, 60 years ago, I think it's 60 years ago, when the founder of IKEA sat down to come up with this concept, he didn't think about all of that back then, right? So these ideas have emerged over time. And actually, it took 30 years for IKEA to get what we would call product market or product service fit. It literally took them 30 years into the 1970s before they sat down and said, okay, we've got some stuff that we're selling, people are buying it, but what do we actually stand for? And that's when they first started saying, I think we stand for giving low-cost furnishings to working people. So if there are any entrepreneurs on the call that feel bad, I feel bad because Container Solutions is 5 years old and we're still not fully articulate of what we do and what our strategy is. And I say to my team, don't panic. It took IKEA 30 years. So all of these elements of their strategy emerged over time, and they learned from the things they did wrong and they incorporated or doubled down on the things that went well. Formally, this is called emergent strategy. And this model that you're looking at now is taken from Henry Mintzberg. He's an academic, expert really in strategy and management. And it's been altered by the team at Container Solutions to suit our needs. There are 5 key elements here. The first part is the intended strategy. This is what you want to do. So when the founder of IKEA sat down in his log cabin, he was looking at the intended strategy. And actually 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I was in Amsterdam in the OBA library because we didn't have an office. And I literally wrote down what I think Container Solutions should do and shouldn't do. And I've got those notes somewhere. A lot of the strategy that I came up with that day continues right now, but a lot of it was thrown away, right? And nowadays, in a very dynamic environment, your intended strategy is nothing more than a set of hypotheses. Some of those hypotheses survive contact with reality and they become the deliberate strategy. Some of them do not, and they become non-realized strategies. So when my boss at Accenture said, plan the work and work the plan, what he would have done is taken the intended strategy, made it work, even though the context had changed. And that's why when I worked there, a lot of our strategies were a little bit shit because the context had changed, so they didn't make sense anymore. So those things that survive contact with reality move into the deliberate strategy. And finally, as the context changes, new ideas may emerge. And these are what we call emergent strategies. Now, with a bit of common sense, and if they fit into your plans, they will join the main bulk of your work to form what we call the realized strategy. But the trick here, and the reason you know this is about process, is you only know what the realized strategy is in hindsight. You don't know it in advance, right? You can't know it. So that's why emergent strategy requires creative leaders, capital if you need it, and flexibility, because if you don't have those things in your organization, you'll never be able to juggle those things that are emerging. And definitely at Container Solutions, we didn't realize we'd get into 24-hour support, and we didn't realize we'd get into product development, but we did, and they make sense. So for the time being, our realized strategy is about cloud native, product development, and strategy itself. Now, why do we call it the fuck it bucket, right? Why do we call it the fuck it bucket? Well, first of all, I'm from Hull, and I've been desperately trying to inject East Yorkshire language into the strategic literature for years, and I've managed to get the fuck it bucket into, right, the main. This is my key contribution to the literature. The fuck it bucket is full of ideas. Some of them might be good, and the problem is that you're just not ready. The timing's not right. So what we learn at Container Solutions is a lot of our non-realized strategies, very often we're back in the bucket and taking them back out and bringing them back to life. So you shouldn't see it as a waste basket. It's not the stuff that's been thrown away. As long as you focus on learning, it's full of things: documents, half a book, open source code, a contact at a bank that we once met. So don't fear your failures and don't view them as waste, because if you're organized, that bucket will become a repository of ideas. These are the 5 things I mentioned. I won't go into them in any more details because we just discussed them on the previous slide, but they're organized here so people can grab them when we share the deck later. But in summary, the 5 points: what you intend to do, the bits that survive contact, the deliberate strategy, your non-realized strategies, they go in the bucket, your emergent strategies that pop up over time, and your realized strategies. If there's anybody on the call who's technical, and I'm guessing that's a lot of you that are engineering managers, emergent strategies often come into play with open source tools, because obviously you've got a vision for what you want to do. And Starling Bank over my shoulder in the city, they told me they would have made different choices around technology if that technology was available, but it wasn't. So as open source tools evolve, they might form part of your emerging tech strategy. So there's no point consuming open source if you're not going to take the latest versions and the latest security patches. So that's just one clue as to things that, you know, change over time. Okay, so that's strategy, and we think that's a good definition. It's as good as any you'll find in most books. Most books on this subject matter are terrible. I can actually provide some reading afterwards that we use here at CS. So now we can move to the model of the strategist. This is also very important because you don't see this spoken about very often. There's lots of books on strategy. As I said, most of them are terrible. There's lots of frameworks too, but a framework for strategy, business model canvas, 5 forces analysis is extremely formulaic. If you could capture a market by filling in a spreadsheet, we would all do it. The defining characteristic of most strategy is that it's terrible. So these frameworks might get you started, but they're too formulaic. Anyway, within all these books, nobody talks about the actual strategist, the people who need to bring this to life, because you need to be resilient, you need to be creative, you need to have tons of energy. And so we talk about this because often a company might be able to cook up a strategy, but you'll never see it through to completion unless you're extremely resilient. So let's just take a look at what we think of as the key elements of the strategist. They look something like this. So the first thing is empathy. Now this may seem surprising, but most strategists, whether they're leading civil rights movements, working class uprisings, whether they're politicians, or in my case, the founders of a business, usually a strategist represents a group of people. And in order to understand them, you need to have empathy with them. So when we started CS, we wanted to, we spoke for our customers, the ones who were really frustrated with other consultancies, but we also spoke for all the engineers who were fed up, wanted to do something different, etc., etc. you need empathy because everything in strategy gets done through coalitions, right? So when you have a heart-to-heart connection with somebody, when you speak for them or represent them, they will come with you. Related to this is this understanding of reality. A lot of executives make a fatal, it's a schoolboy error actually, it's a fatal error. They dream about the future. What will cloud native bring us? What will it do to our margins? How can we capture a different geography? Future, future, future. But if your team's crap, you're not going to do anything. So if strategy doesn't start in the future, it starts in the present. The future is where you're going, but that's a different matter. When we talk about reality, we often give the John F. Kennedy a story, the moonshot, right? We all talk about moonshots. This wasn't impossible. It was well within the reach of the United States. Rocket technology was there. The computers were just there, just about. The physics to get it to the moon was well understood. So it was a stretch goal, but it was within their capabilities. John F. Kennedy did not say, let's invent time travel. So within that strategy that looked future orientated was actually a deep understanding of their current reality. Strategically, it was very smart. He bound the whole country together in search of a goal. So it wasn't bad strategy, it was good strategy. But it was definitely rooted in the realities of the day. And of course, imagination, if you're meant to plot a course to the future, you need a good imagination, but you also need a voice. So for those of you who follow me on Twitter, you would have heard me talk about the Duke of Wellington this week. I'm not a military person, but I found history interesting. The Duke of Wellington was really, really quite eloquent. And he came up with a lot of their sayings. Like he said, just because a horse is born, just because you're born in a barn doesn't mean you're a horse. And that's because he was actually born in Ireland. He was Irish, actually. Not many people know that. But he felt part of the English aristocracy. So he basically said, look, I'm English, really. Just because I was born in Ireland doesn't make me Irish. Now, this is a pretty contemptible, it's not a very nice thing to say, because he also said, you know, the problem with rail travel is, and why we shouldn't do it, is because it will make the working classes too mobile, right? And I think the last thing the Duke of Wellington wanted was the working classes descending on London for days out. But the point is he was eloquent, but he was also smart, right? He understood reality, he had empathy, he had a lot of empathy for his men, actually, and he had voice. So he was able to find the words when he needed them. And here you actually see a blueprint for what we all need to do. Each of us, as we're to develop as leaders and strategic leaders, need to learn to do all 5 of these things really well. The reality is most of us can't. Most of us are what we call at Container Solution a half-baked strategist. We might be good at the vision bit, but we're terrible when it comes to empathy. Actually, empathy is the #1 thing every leader will score low on. So I guarantee if you do a 360 now or some psych evaluation, most of you will score the lowest on empathy. And saying, but I have a lot of empathy is not a defense. It actually proves that you don't. Don't feel too worried about that. It's very confrontational. I make my team do it all the time. And it's empathy is the one thing that's really difficult. And it's because we're focused on stuff, plans, technology, getting stuff done. That's what managers do. They get stuff done. So that's why the empathy element gets neglected. What do these half-baked strategists look like? Well, this is the most common archetype. I developed this years ago, actually, but it's still a lot of fun. The angry engineer, this is the one that many people in our world recognize. The engineer has a lot of empathy for the group that they represent. Often they have a voice, actually, and it can be a very loud voice. The angry engineer gets off to a good start, but their understanding of reality is limited to technology, or it's limited to what they're doing in their domain. And there is a blind spot that they've got, which is people do not like to be shouted at. But management is power. It doesn't matter how reprehensible you think that is, and it doesn't matter philosophically if you don't like it. Managers get stuff done. They're a source of power in organizations. And angry engineers alienate the people they need to bring their initiatives to life. Now, this was a slide I've just added this morning, so I'm very sorry that it's a little bit wordy. But what we focus on at Container Solutions is what we call moderate assertiveness. So assertiveness in the narrow managerial sense is getting your own way. right? So I can go downstairs and I can kick and scream about what we're having for dinner tonight, and my family will probably say, okay, we're going to eat what Jamie wants. But I will do damage to my relationship. Now, there's a lot of studies, and I'm happy to share them later, that show in the world of business, moderate assertiveness, focusing on what you need, but without burning your relationships, are what drives the most successful strategic leaders. I like to think I'm moderately assertive. Sometimes I think I'm a bit of a pushover, and then when I lose my temper, I'm a bit of an idiot. But if you look at those people at CS who have done really well, they're the adults, the people who slowly but surely keep pushing, keep sharing, and keep listening. So they're assertive, they're not pushovers, but they try to focus on the relationship. So the angry engineer basically doesn't have this. They're too assertive. And I know it's very hard to believe, because we all get told in software, oh, you need to be more assertive. And the poor Americans get trained from their school years. You've got to be assertive. You've got to be pushy. The truth is, in a complex environment with educated people and intelligent people, being pushy is not wise. And it's actually one of the key breakthroughs I try to teach my people, that next level of your career, you need to stop being assertive. That feedback might have been valid 2 years ago. You've mastered that now. Now you need to start getting real good at doing relationships. Okay, so this is the angry engineer's problem. And now, I don't mean to offend anybody with the next slide, but this is the fantasist. Now, the fantasist is not always a leader or a manager, but often is. They've often got a big voice, which in a hierarchical organization carries even more weight. They might even have a vision, but occasionally that vision is taken from a conference. So, for example, what would the fantasist do? Well, they come to a conference, Software Circus or whatever. They see somebody give a talk about Spotify, and then they come back to the office and say, we're doing tribes, we're doing squads. Spotify have documented the reason tribes and squads don't work. They've written until they're blue in the face that this will not work in your context. And it doesn't always work in their context. But this is not something that the fantasist listens to. Now, the problem with the fantasist, they also can't build coalitions. Because the first time they come back from a conference and say, let's do this, everybody does it. But then the poor fantasist loses their energy, and then the initiative dissipates. They don't understand reality. So doing squads in a bank with legacy systems is not the first strategic move you need to make. So over time, the fantasist becomes less credible. Now, you're all very intelligent people, so you will not be surprised to figure out that the strategist is actually a combination of the angry engineer and the fantasist. The book we wrote is full of studies. One of them's from Adidas, one of them's from Starling Bank. On our website, we've studied the Financial Times, we've studied, who else? ASOS, and of course, we've helped loads of our own customers. Often what happens, a pattern that's emerging, is the angry engineer and the fantasists find each other, and they drive through large-scale technical change. Some of them might still have a feel for their ego. They still might be defensive and ambitious, but ultimately these people are on the end of their ego needs. They've proven themselves, right? They're maybe 35, 40, they've done loads of good work, and they now realize there's something missing. As their defenses come down, they start to be able to work with each other. The point is that this modern strategist does not exist, right? None of us have got mass empathy, mass visioning skills, mass planning skills. The top team at Container Solutions has got 12 people in it, and each one of us makes up for the deficiencies in the others. And I say to my team all the time, we're talented, but we're flawed, right? Never forget that. Talented, but flawed. And so we need to find each other, and we need to work out how we can compensate in order to bring our strategies to life. Okay, let me check the time. I'll take a small breather to have a sip of coffee. Are there any questions at that point? If not, we have one section and then we can do a bigger set of Q&A at the end. The terrible thing about webinars is that you can't see the audience, so you never know if you're up or down, winning or losing. To summarize, we've spoken about what strategy is. It emerges over time, but there's clearly some space for some creative thinking when you come up with your intended strategy. We've also looked at the strategist. I never mentioned they have to be tough bastards, and that's not on the model. You have to be a real tough so-and-so to make this work, because you will reach obstacles. You need to plow through them, right? So we saw that the strategist has got lots of skills they need to develop, and that's actually interesting because as your strategies develop, so will you as a person. Now, finally, we get to what we believe is the core of strategy, the design of actions. And what we mean by that is which actions should we do and in which order. And this might sound rudimentary, but a lot of people get this wrong. One of the ways we design actions at Container Solutions is through patterns. So many managers are just not experienced at doing strategy. I wasn't 5 years ago, and arguably, maybe I'm not now, maybe I'm still learning. So patterns are a simple way to connect really expert people, experts in strategy, to us lot, the sort of manager on the street. And with these patterns, we can then go on to design actions. I'm now going to try to explain what these are in order for it to make sense. So, oh dear, that slide cannot be in the right place. Sorry about that. Okay, so a pattern is very similar to a word, right? Table, chair, sofa, these are simple words. And in the strategy pattern language, we've got things like research through action, value hierarchy, big bets, etc., etc. Now, you can see on the left, and this is the magic trick of patterns, they've got the ability to create things that are very different, but also instantly recognizable. So you see all of those things are tables, they're obviously tables, but they're also very different. So patterns let us create strategies that work for us, right, in our context. When you've got lots of words, you can stick them together in a language. There's a furniture language. And finally, designs are stories, right? There is a square table with 4 chairs and a sofa in a room. This is what patterns are. Now, very importantly, they are context specific. So, for example, there is a pattern language for buildings. One category of patterns is called the waiting area. Now, a GP's office is a waiting area. A bus stop is a waiting area. In Holland, where I used to live, the benches in the station are a waiting area. But if you put a bus stop in a hospital, clearly that won't work. So when you're looking at all these different design decisions, you need to check the context. So that's what patterns are, context-specific design decisions. Now let me take you through one of our patterns from the strategy language. This is called value hierarchy. So let's first, before we get into that, just let me come out of full screen for a moment, and I'm going to move over to our website, cloudnativepatterns.org. Again, we'll share the link. All of the patterns are open source. If you want to contribute patterns, you can. All of them that are in the book are here. And actually, there's a few extra here that we invented after the book was published. So let's just step through value hierarchy. And specifically, I know you can't read this, but I want to show you that every pattern starts with the context, every single one. So this means if you learn about tribes, the first thing you should do with the tribe pattern is check the context, because if it doesn't fit your context, don't do it. So here we say, when you have a clear understanding of company values and priorities, it's easy to connect people's day-to-day work to their strategy, right? I'll move back to the, I'll just copy that in case people want to pop it open in a different, how do I do chat? Forgive me, I'm working technology, but I'm not very good on I'm not very good. I'll send this to everybody. That's just the link there in case you want to open that in a different browser tab. And I'll move back to the main window. So value hierarchy, sorry, let me rephrase that. Strategy is about making decisions. When you're in an extremely turbulent environment, whether you're in a startup or a company that's moving to cloud native, which is extremely turbulent, it's a massive change, or you've been caught up in COVID, there is an imperative to make quick decisions. Most decisions, most quick decisions come from understanding your company's values. So for example, you want localized decisions, you want engineers making decisions, and you want managers making decisions. You don't want them escalating everything. So value hierarchy is about taking the things you care about. So for example, at Disney's theme parks, they care about safety and they care about fun. They probably care about making money, etc., etc. But in their value hierarchy, they value safety over fun. Because if you get your head chopped off on the roller coaster, this will not be fun for anybody. Starling Bank, who we studied, also had a value hierarchy. So you see this pattern emerges in many strategic initiatives, many cloud native transformations. And they said, number one, we value security. Number two, we value resilience. And number three, we value scale. But in their hierarchy, the most important thing was security. The second most important thing was resilience. And the third most important thing was scale. So when an engineer was working on something, they didn't have to speak to their boss to say, well, this thing doesn't scale, but it's secure. Well, which one should I do? Because they know from the value hierarchy. Obviously, if you can get all three things, you can. So strategy is about making decisions, and this is one pattern that will enable that. All of the different patterns are collected on these cards. You can grab yourself a free copy from the website. We'll send you to them physically. And what they let you do is look at all the things you can do, and especially they can help you put things in order. So one of the things that usually comes at the beginning of a strategic initiative is management buy-in, vision first, and an evangelist. So there's really not much point in building a private cloud before you've got management on board. And the instructions for the cards are all on the website. You can take a look at them later. In regards to this specific webinar, we're now going to look at three really important patterns, and you will be not surprised to discover that they're all about decision making. Strategy is emergent. It moves forward via actions, like a good novel, right? That's how it works. So how do we take actions in the face of such deep uncertainty? Well, occasionally, when we're being a bit naughty, we do one of these two things. These are not very wise ways to take actions to create movement, but they are very common. Psychologically, uncertainty is absolute agony for human beings, for me and for everybody on this call. So one of the most common ways to make decisions in large enterprises, especially the ones who've got lots of money, is to go big early, right? Typically, you don't get punished for this, because often people say, oh, well, you gave it a shot. What an amazing vision you had. I would not accept this from my executives. I would not accept going big early, right? We would consider this to be reckless. If you go big early because psychologically you're uncomfortable and you forget to do risk reduction, you're nothing more than reckless. And now we get to another thing you won't get blamed for, small changes. So again, psychologically, because uncertainty is scary, and if you work in an environment where making larger moves or taking larger actions that don't work lead to punishment, small changes can be very seductive. They're often valuable and they cost very little. Nobody will get blamed for trying to use the company's money wisely. But the problem here is radical breakthroughs do not come from stepwise changes. This is the failure of the Kaizen movement, and it's often the failure of the agile software development movement. You cannot increment your way into everything. So, for example, COVID. No business has survived contact with COVID. None of them. COVID made our government strategies, our airline strategies, our retail strategies look absolutely ridiculous. When COVID hit, my team and I didn't say to each other, oh, how can we increment our way out of this? We needed to make radical changes immediately, right? As every team did. Focusing on the incremental would not have helped us during COVID, and as a matter of fact, would likely have led us to a much worse outcome than we currently sit with. So because of this psychological agony, you've got two very inappropriate types of moves. Now, that's the bad news. And if you recognize yourself in there, don't feel bad. this is normal, right? We all do this. There are three much more interesting moves, strategic moves you can consider. All of them are patterns and all of them on the website, so you can read further. The first one is what we call a no regret move. They don't cost anything, and they're often very valuable. The point of a no regret move is that you're trying to learn. The only reason you're trying to learn is because of all this uncertainty. So you're trying to create situational awareness. This is the exact opposite of going big early. Now, once your situational awareness has started to increase, you can start to do moves that we call options or hedges. Now, they're a little bit more costly, but the downside is limited, whereas the upside is actually can often be unlimited. So this is when you've got a range of potential decisions. When you had no regret moves, there was tons of things you could do. You've narrowed the field of potential decisions, and now you're into the realm of hypothesis testing, proof of concepts, minimal viable products, 3-week projects, feasibility studies. And then finally, when you have put the odds, stacked the odds in your favor, now you're ready to take a big bet. You've exhausted your options, you've taken all your no regret moves, now we can gamble. I cannot tell you the amount of customers we meet who say to us, right, we're ready to do this, we've budgeted £5 million for this initiative. And we're like, okay, what are you going to spend it on? And actually, with a little bit of using our patterns workshop, our cards, we can change that €5 million budget into maybe 1 or even 1.5 million by slowly building up the initiative. In such discussions, I usually draw this on the whiteboard. So on the left-hand side, you've got your no regret moves. The risk is really high. The job of the strategist is to pull the risk out of the project and initiative over time. Small cost, small benefit. But by the time we're in that middle box, all of a sudden we're getting a much better feel for our capabilities, what the market's doing, and which open source tools might work in our context. Now we're into the realm of MVPs, proof of concepts. And eventually, when we've stacked the odds in our favor, we are ready to make much bigger bets on the right-hand side. Let me be very clear. This is not about money. Of course, for a small company like ours, money matters. This is about focusing the creative energies of your people. The big bet might cost you 5 million. In fact, these big bets can be hundreds of millions. There are case studies of failed digital banks that have cost 100, 150 million pounds. We were involved in a number of these initiatives, and it's because they went for the right-hand side without de-risking the project. The main thing this is about is focusing your creative energy and not burning your people out. So some people, 5, 10 million pounds, they don't give a shit. But recovering from that is the biggest problem. And this is where the fantasist always fails. It's not just a broken initiative, it's the bodies that you leave behind. So this really is about focusing energy and building up momentum over time. And of course, this is the Duke of Wellington. As I said, I'm not a military person, but I have enjoyed reading about these historical figures. And I told you he was eloquent. All of the business of life is to endeavor to find out what you don't know by what you do. That's what I call guessing what was at the other side of the hill. The Duke of Wellington, he didn't call them no regret moves, but back then, British soldiers thought that spying on their opposition was not a good thing. They said it was, what's the word? It wasn't gallant, it wasn't brave, it wasn't cricket. The Duke of Wellington said there's nothing as stupid as a gallant soldier. That's what he actually said. And so Wellington used spies, but also he used to get on his horse. Because another thing he said to his lieutenants would be like, oh, we're not sure what's happening over there. And he used to say to them, damn it, man, you've got 2 eyes and a good horse. Go and see. So the Duke of Wellington did lots of no regret moves to understand the landscape. And he prodded and probed. He attacked a castle just for a few hours, checked its defences. And when he had stacked the odds in his favour, he took the big bets. So I found that really interesting. And this quotation specifically is exactly what we do with our strategy framework. We are endeavouring to find out what we don't know by what we do know. And the quicker we do that, the quicker we can get to where we want to be. The quicker we can outsmart our competitors. Okay, this is a little bit wordy, this slide, forgive me. In conclusion, we see strategy as a learning process. Now, it's action that increases knowledge and therefore reduces risk. Jeff Bezos, I think, is a bit of a madman, but you can't deny he knows what he's doing around strategy. Amazon talk about having a bias for action. Now, what they mean by that is action increases knowledge. You do not move a strategic initiative forward through analysis. The whole point of strategy is that you deploy it in the uncertain. If something is uncertain or unknown, you cannot read about it. And in fact, if you're playing the strategy game in a well-known area, you've made a mistake, because if you're playing there, so too are all your competitors. Now, our patterns help you design action. They just give you a framework for going from one thing to the next thing to the next. They're completely free. We want the world to get better at strategy. Don't feel bad. Ego can be a dangerous thing. If you're on this call, aged between 30 and 50, you're definitely not the end product. It's okay to say, do you know what? In a very certain context, my strategic muscles have not been flexed for a while. Let the patterns help you. Let them connect your world to the world of the amazing strategists that help to write them. We did meet the following patterns. We met the fuck it bucket. We talked about gradually raising the stakes. That was this image. This is about gradually raising the stakes, or as I like to say, stacking the odds in our favor. And we've got good at this at Container Solutions because we're unfunded startup, but we are now global, right? So we like to stack the odds in our favor. Now, in terms of follow-up, I will be joined by a guy called Simon Wardley. Simon Wardley is a really, really entertaining speaker, excellent strategist, and he invented something called Wardley Maps. So he will be joining me in 4 weeks where we'll do a deep dive on his maps and we'll do a deeper dive on our patterns. So this will give you much more context as to how this thing works. Simon is hugely, hugely entertaining, by the way. In 2 weeks from now, Penny will look at these patterns, but specifically around cloud native transformation. So whereas today we just looked at risk reduction, gradually decision making, he will look at things like public cloud infrastructure, continuous integration, chaos engineering, and how we can fit those together to create a context specific strategy for your cloud native transformation. Now, I'm just going to come out of full screen. All of the patterns we discussed are available here in a much neater format. So all of the strategy patterns are on this single page. Now, for some reason, value hierarchy has disappeared. So forgive me for that. I will ask my colleagues to put the value hierarchy back, but all of the, all of the patterns are there. Where's the chat? Let me put that there. There we go. All of the patterns are available here, including dynamic strategy, which we spoke about. I'll scroll down a little bit more. Research through action, vision first. All of them will really give you a good handle as to how these patterns can be used to design action and how they can be used within the framework we discussed today. And on that note, I think that's me done. I'm very grateful for your patience, and of course, I would love to hear questions if anybody has them. I'm going to stop sharing now so I can see you all again. You can ask questions in the chat box if you prefer, or you can just unmute yourself and shout out.
No, really enjoyed it, Jamie. Really good. I think what's interesting to me, right, is I don't want to say it in a bad way, but like none of it is groundbreaking, but then again, it is. Like the way you're putting it out, it is groundbreaking, even though the concepts are not, which is, I think, really good.
You know, people say that we're radicals, and I'd love to have a radical tag. The secret to this framework is it's from the 1960s. Drucker, late 60s, and Andy Grove, late 70s, and Mintzberg, 80s and 90s. That's it. And we say to people, we just do business as normal. We want to pay our tax and we want to be humane and create a safe environment. I don't think this deserves the radical tag. I think what it actually means is a lot of businesses are radically terrible. But it was very nice of you to say that, Alex. Thanks. Did
Hey,
you
Jamie, I thought,
did you see yourself, Alex, as an angry engineer? Did any of those archetypes speak to you?
Like different stages in my career, yes. Like at the beginning, for sure, anger engineer, I would say.
So
Towards like later, probably the fantasist, and then hopefully somewhere in between. But definitely, yeah, I've been in both places, I'm sure.
the problem is when you transition from engineering to management, then you become an angry fantasist.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, Ben, I'm going to bring you in there.
yeah, Jamie, I thought that was really useful. I think there was two things, I guess, that were pertinent for me. Where I work, I'm in the middle of trying to merge 4 IT departments together and all the disparate IT systems, which some are heavily cloud-based and others are on-premise. So there's a big strategic challenge there about how we plan that. And then at the same time, we provide services to the automotive sector, which is ripe for digital disruption. So understanding our place in that and what we need to do, especially after COVID-19. So some of that framework you talked there about the, I guess, stacking the odds was quite interesting and useful to help frame some of the things we need to do. I also liked your values piece, because one of the things we've done throughout COVID, we had 3 core tenets, which was make sure the company survives, clearly. Make sure any decisions we make are human, because we're having to make some pretty difficult decisions. And that whatever we do, we come out of it stronger. So, you know, the things that you've always put to one side, if you've got chance, do them now while the rest of the world's quiet. So actually, it's quite interesting, that framework of values, because that sort of, without even realising it, we did that. And then going forward, some of the other stuff will help, I think. So thank you.
Right. So these patterns, we didn't invent them, we mined them. So when we spoke to Starling Bank and they told us about resilience, security, we said, well, that's a value hierarchy. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I went, well, that's literally called value hierarchy. So good teams do a lot of this implicitly. So I think if you order the book, Ben, or if the cards even, you might recognize a lot of what you do. And then there might be a few patterns you don't do. You're like, oh, okay, I'm going to put that in our arsenal. Yeah.
Yes, useful. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's good to see you. Really good to see you.
Yeah, you too. We should arrange a catch-up at some point when we can get to the pub again.
I tried about 2 years ago, but actually the rest of them don't want to hear this.
No.
Any more questions?
Yeah. Hi. Oh, sorry, Owen. After you.
Well, mine's not really. I'm afraid I'm the. It's not a question, more of a comment kind of guy. Sorry.
Okay.
I feel like to some extent you're. I don't know whether you're doing this deliberately or not, but you're underselling the whole thing by labeling it cloud native. So much in there is unrelated to cloud native, and this is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a positive thing. It's there's a lot of things that are useful to me and the company I'm in, and we're not trying to go through a cloud native transformation. It's useful to us generally because we are helping other people do that, but just internally, so many of the patterns are relevant to change, to transformation, not just cloud native transformation. And I know, just felt like saying that.
Thanks for saying that. So basically what happened is we studied ourselves and we learned how did we execute strategy, because Container Solutions, I'm trying to be modest, but it has, without funding, become a £20 million business, which is remarkable in only 5 years. So there's a bit of a secret sauce, and then other people were making comments on this, and then we started to analyze ourselves. So a big part of the framework comes from how do you scale a business? But because we're not in the business of scaling businesses, we're in the business of cloud native transformation, we try to contextualize it like that. However, it's obvious to us now that the strategy stuff stands alone. And actually, that's why the website is now, we've carved this off. We'll probably have to write another book called Strategy, but I guess we don't know what to do with it. But it's nice of you to say, and it's definitely generalizable. And then it's the other patterns around technology that complete it for cloud native transformation. Yeah, it's nice of you to say. Thank you.
Hi, Jamie. It's Connor here. Thanks ever so much for putting that together. I found that really enjoyable and actually a really nice compliment to the book. I think, firstly, just on Owen's comment, I would completely agree around the sort of secret sauce aspect that stems far wider than cloud native. And I would say that the thing that seems to set Container Solutions apart is the understanding and the emphasis around human psychology. Kelsey Hightower made quite an interesting tweet yesterday that it should always be human first and technology second, with a few smiles in between. And I think there's an ignorance towards that in the market to an extent. But I guess the question that I've got for you, Jamie, is reasonably pertinent to the current situation. The book touches nicely on how to balance proficiency and creativity. Given the circumstances that we're in at the moment, what sort of things are Container Solutions doing to ensure that they're trying to get that balance right?
Yeah, so what are we doing to get the balance right? So this is more crisis management, and actually crisis management is really not much different to project management. So the framework we follow is basically has 3 steps. Your first response, the resolution of the crisis, and usually most companies then breathe a sigh of relief and just feel, oh my God, I'm so glad that's finished. There's actually a third element, which is learning from the crisis. So when it comes to decision making, the 2 things you need are information and the time to analyze it. These are the 2 things you don't have in a crisis. And so one of the things we talk about is forgiveness, because we are going to make mistakes, right? And it feels a bit like reading the news. So when you do an all hands on presentation, you want to get the tone right. You want to say to people, this is a serious situation, without terrifying them. And you want to paint a picture of the bright future without you giving hope, without false hope. So there's 2 elements of it. There's the decision making element of it, and then there's the tone of your communications. We very much are a people company. So Ben mentioned that earlier. Within the first 8 hours, we'd run all the numbers, and this is where being organized matters. So people think strategy and capabilities, are the same thing. If you build your capabilities, your strategy will follow. That's not exactly true, but when you've got strong capabilities, you can go quickly. So the finance team were able to run a series of forecasts. This gave me the confidence to say at the top of the crisis, in the first day actually, there will be not a single layoff at Container Solutions. I might have been feeling particularly brave and full of bravado. I might have said something like, we will all eat rice before anybody gets laid off, right? Anyway, it didn't come to that, thankfully. So basically the things we're doing, framing the crisis is a 3-stage process. We're using 2-dimensional matrices, quite right, to explain one thing. If you plot on a 2D matrix with your financial health on one axis and your psychological health on the other, then the psychological health is where we're focused. And we will come back to financial health at a later date. Other companies chose to work on the other axis. They chopped away all overhead, chopped away all fat, restored themselves to financial health, and they believe they can rebuild off after that. Our argument is that financial health is easier to rebuild than psychological and cultural health. But we have a team that can hustle, right? So we might think that, and a company that was, not as quick as us might be like, oh, no, let's get the finances straight first. A lot of the reasons teams focus on finances is because they've got private equity funding, and that's what their investors are telling them. Cut early, cut often. And what I said on Twitter is cut early, cut often. It's not a rite of passage, right? So a lot of the CEOs will be told to do this. Oh, you have to do it one day. It's a good time to practice. It's not a rite of passage. So we didn't do that because we felt we could rebuild our financial health. So, using matrices to help decisions and communicate, getting the tone right, regular communications. We were doing everyday communications. Now we're in the resolution part. We know our finances, our capital needs are sorted, mental health breaks. We have a team of psychologists on staff, so that their services have been extended. Not a forced vacation, but we're taking simultaneous breaks so that we can all relax, those type of things. But basically, if your decisions, if they come from a desire to look after your people, all of your decisions will look a little bit like that. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded. Did that answer the question?
No, it really did, and thank you for going into the detail. For what it's worth, you seem to be doing a really good job. Ian was saying that you've been a really strong emotional leader throughout this. It's really great to hear.
That's very nice. Thank you. Yeah, empathy. We tried our best. We really tried our best.
Thanks again, Jamie.
You're welcome, Connor. Any more questions?
This is sort of a detail. You mentioned no regret moves as something positive and small incremental changes as something less positive.
Yeah.
It sounds like a small incremental change is an instance of a no regret move, so I probably missed something.
No, you didn't miss it. As I was doing those slides, that became obvious to me because a big bet, it was about timing. I need to do that differently. A no regret move actually can be a small incremental change. And incremental changes are fantastic. They drive our business too. I actually wanted to say, psychologically, people don't like uncertainty, was my first point. And secondly, there are two types of people in our businesses. The one person is the person with bravado, usually a man, who won't admit they hate uncertainty, but they do. So they go big early without de-risking. And then the other type is the incremental person who uses incremental advances in every dimension. But occasionally you need a hedge or a big bet, and such a timid person will stick to the incremental. And that can actually cause problems. So we know some companies that are super incremental, really lovely, but there's a huge opening in the market comes and you're like, take it, you've got to take it. But it's just not in their DNA to, let's say, risk $250,000 on such a initiative. So it was about time, and I'll work on those slides actually. Thanks for that.
Oh, thank you. It was great talk. Thank you very much.
It was good to see you, Willem. Really
Yeah,
nice.
likewise, Jamie.
All right. Now I realise we're at the end of the time. I think I've got more time if we need it, but if there are no more questions, I think you all want to get back to another tea or a coffee.
There was a small comment about empathy in the chat. Abhinav, I hope I'm not butchering the name, is asking how to cultivate empathy as an individual and within organizational culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult because of all the things that a leader gets promoted for. It's often getting stuff done, fixing a broken unit. And basically the problem with empathy is that it runs at right angles to getting things done. So when I have to tell people off and move shit, I don't go there and say, how are you feeling today? And so it's a fine balancing act to learn how to switch from being empathic to being into that mode of getting stuff done. Now, if you spend 5 years getting stuff done, you will calcify. You will become a hard-nosed bastard, right? So you need to be aware of this. Now, once the awareness is there, you see a whole range of things you can do. Training, leadership selection. So we've just been in the process of promoting somebody from within Container Solutions to become our CTO. The 3 things we value, so you see the values guide everything. The 3 things we're looking for in the process were creativity, empathy. I should know this off the top of my head. Creativity, empathy. Oh, there was one extra thing that was specific to each candidate. That's the 3rd element. So those values are baked into the interview process. And our occupational psychologists literally test for that. And we literally hire for that. So the filter at Container Solutions, you won't get a job here unless you've got the right empathy or it's emerged in you as a characteristic. So the short answer is it's really difficult. It's about knowing your values, because you could work for a company that just doesn't value empathy. It's about knowing your values, understanding leadership selection, understanding leadership development, and all of that starts point 4 at the hiring process. Try not to get empathy confused with weakness. So my friend Ben's on the call. You saw us chatting earlier. We actually know each other because we both played rugby league, which is the tough version of the sport. But even in such a tough sport, a brutal sport, the empathy from the best coaches would have empathy. They would know how you felt when you were disappointed, and they would destroy you in training. Not much empathy there, but when they need it, they would be able to switch. And there's lots of good materials out there. I'm going to actually, the EQ Leader is a nice resource that we use, but there are many others. And Abhinav, I'm happy to follow up with you after this, more detailed should you need it. All right. Any more?
I think it's time.
It's time as well. I think an hour is a good hour. Well, I'm really grateful for the positive feedback. I'm mainly grateful I didn't butcher that. we are building up. There's going to be another one in 2 weeks and another one in 4 weeks. And Simon is a hugely entertaining speaker. So if you can make it back, fantastic. Otherwise, we'll send you the video. And, you know, take it easy. Thank you again. And please keep safe and sane during the crisis. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Yeah.